Hi, welcome back to the Sounds Like Freedom podcast. I'm your host, Deborah Henne. I'm here today with Jane Abbate, who understands what it's like to be on the healing journey after trauma. For too many years, she was convinced she would never get over 3 abortions. She believed it was impossible to be understood, forgiven, and loved. But when she connected to the heart of God, she learned she was wrong. Also known on YouTube as My Mentor Jane, she helps women and men cope with post abortion guilt and shame, heal heartbreaks, release anger, and learn to forgive. Through her videos and her book, Where Do Broken Hearts Go? Healing and Hope After Abortion, she can help you reclaim a life of purpose, self respect, and joy. Jane lives in Virginia with her husband and 4 cats. Welcome, Jane.
I'm glad to be here. Thank you so much for having me, and hello to your audience.
So as we were talking a little bit pre-show in the back studio, your message and your story and your willingness to share is so powerful and so timely. I think there's a lot in the church too of people who have this experience and are dealing. And I think especially in the church, could be a lot of shame involved with past choices in this area, and people don't talk about it. So if you would be willing to kind of open up and share your story and how you found freedom and healing and forgiveness.
Oh, yes, I'm honored to do that. And on my YouTube studio, My Mentor Jane, I provide a lot more detail. But let me say, I grew up in a Catholic family, went to church. I was am the youngest of 4 daughters. And I was very shy when I was a kid, afraid to talk to boys, never had any dates. So when I went off to college, wow, this was like a chance to start over and like kind of re-identify instead of the shy bookworm, that I could be somebody fun and attractive and so on. And so I really got into the party scene, and I had a boyfriend towards the end of college who I really had fallen in love with. And right after we graduated from college, I found out I was pregnant. And um, it may sound kind of surprising that it was a surprise to be pregnant, having sex outside of marriage, but I really panicked. I was afraid to tell my family. I thought I had to was supposed to be the good girl, and I just was afraid of their reaction, and I was ashamed, and mostly I was just panic struck. And so back then I opened up the Yellow Pages, found a clinic, and had my first abortion, my very first abortion. And I went by myself. I didn't tell anybody about it. I just, took care of it. And I don't want to say that it was that it was an easy decision, but it was a decision that I made out of sheer panic. And so you know, I went to work the next day because you have to, right? You just like kind of pick up your life. And I think I was traumatized. Abortions is a trauma, physical trauma, an emotional trauma. And so I picked up, went back to work, and really just tried to put it behind me, but it wasn't behind me. And I stayed in the party scene, and ended up a couple years later pregnant by a guy I was dating, and nice guy, but it wasn't a serious relationship. And it was like I re-experienced the same surprise, the same panic, the same fears, and had a second abortion. And it's, having that trauma, it's, you're almost like on automatic pilot. And again, I went back to work, and I look back now and I realize I was throwing myself into my work and trying to prove my worth, and that I wasn't such a terrible person by my career. And my career was rising, but my emotional health and my spiritual health was dropping like a rock. Fast forward a few more years, and I was pregnant a third time by a different man. And this happened to be a married man that I worked with. And, it just kind of shows you how I was really sort of spiraling down. And of course, I couldn't have a baby with a married man, and I had my third abortion. And so by the time I was 32, I was the mother of 3 aborted children, unmarried, and really was headed pretty solidly to rock bottom. And I was drinking a lot back then. I again, I was working hard, bringing myself up, proving that I was worthwhile through a career. I was married in the meantime, not to any of the fathers of the children. And who I was in the marriage was a very damaged woman, someone who was very angry, very hurt, brokenhearted, very shame-filled, guilt-filled. And that doesn't make for a good partner in a marriage. And about I'd say about 10 years into our marriage, I finally was so anxiety filled, so tense, and really very, very depressed. No one would know it from the outside. But I saw an advertisement for a Rachel's Vineyard abortion healing program. And I reached out to that. And through the wonderful women that were there, that were literally the hands and feet and the voices of Christ, and the other women who had experienced abortion, and hearing their stories and connecting with them. Sorry about that. I was able to just really understand that abortion doesn't have to be an unforgivable sin. It isn't an unforgivable sin. And I'll kind of pause there and we can go from there. But that's that retreat and stepping forward for healing, finally exposing myself was the beginning of a whole new life.
Absolutely. And I want to kind of pull out a couple things that you said that really stuck out to me. That there was a worthlessness lie that you were believing and had embraced. And I think that, sometimes, especially people who have grown up in the church in very pro-life viewpoints, sometimes I think we miss that, but for the grace of God go I.
Yeah.
Right. And we can stand in judgment in somebody. But the reality is there are commonalities that drive behavior and decisions and choices. And maybe if we could focus on that and say, you know what? I struggled with the worthlessness lie for a long time and threw myself into work and projects and God had to get a hold of me and say, your worth isn't in that. It's in me and who I created you to be. So maybe I didn't make the same choices, but if we kind of tune into our thoughts and realize that we all need healing, and that instead of standing in judgment in one another, that we can come around one another to find that healing and freedom for sure. So kind of tuning into that self-talk, I think, is so important. And also the panic. And that's a real thing. I mean, my husband and I found out we were pregnant for the first time. We were married and we had wanted to be parents, but we're not expecting to be parents when we were parents. And for 1 second there, it was almost like a little bit of a taste of what somebody who's not married. And obviously it's kind of apples and oranges, because I was married. We did want to have children, but it was a panic of, what am I going to tell him? We're not ready. We are not ready. We didn't get everything in order. I don't feel ready and equipped for that. And how am I going to have that conversation with him? That, hey, guess what?
Yes.
This is happening.
Yes.
But that little tiny taste gave me so much more compassion for what an unwed mother, especially a very young unwed mother, would be feeling and experiencing. And, she wouldn't necessarily have the support of even her parents. And just kind of realizing some of the things that drive these choices. And if we can really address that, I think we'll find ourselves in a different place, hopefully, culturally.
Yeah, for sure. And I appreciate you bringing that up, because there's a large percentage of women who have abortions already have children. And many people are surprised about that. And it can be for lots of different reasons. It can be because there's trouble in the marriage. It can be because there's challenges with other children. It can be financial. It can be emotional. I'm already like totally overwhelmed with raising the children I have. How can I bring one more in? I mean, there's lots of different reasons. There's concern about the health of the mom or the health of the baby if it's carried to term. So there's lots of reasons why women who have children who and or who are married uh, are overcome with fear and uncertainty and begin to really question, can I go through with this? And then I run a lot of and participate in a lot of different abortion support groups, women and men who've experienced abortion. And you mentioned about young girls. So lots of, there was the panic and fear that I had, so that I never told my parents. But many girls who do tell their parents, there are those parents who will say, absolutely not, you're not having that baby. I've heard from women saying that their parents have said, if you don't have this abortion, you don't have a place to live. We're not supporting you. So what's a young girl, a teenager, supposed to do if her parents say, you can't live here if you have this baby? Then there's the young girls who want their children, want to have that baby. Maybe even the father wants to have the baby too, but then one or other of the sets of parents convince them and kind of force them to, you can't have that. It'll ruin your life, your chances to for college or for all the plans that we have for you. And I think the parents, I like to think that most of them have good intentions for their daughter or for their son, but their own panic and fear gets in the way, and maybe their own overwhelm of how can we bring a baby into the family. And so it's a tough situation all around. And then there's everything in between. Every circumstance is different in terms of like the details and the dynamics of the relationship. Sometimes the father of the baby is abusive and threatens violence, or is just uninvolved. I won't help you. So there's so many different pressures and circumstances. The commonalities, I think, are the fear and panic that set in, and the shame. And the enemy, he's the deceiver, he's the liar. He wants us to believe that we can't do this, we shouldn't go ahead with the pregnancy. So there's a lot of forces, relational forces, spiritual forces, and then our own circumstances and emotions at play.
Absolutely. And I love how you talk about the fathers too. I
Yeah.
think so much focus is put on the mother, and
Hmm.
I mean, her whole body is changing. She's going through, or physically through the pregnancy, but I
Right.
mean, men carry that burden too, that baby is theirs also. And so
Yes.
their panic, their fear, their overwhelm, uh, and trauma, if the abortive choice is made, is very real. And I think sometimes overlooked
Oh.
culturally and in society.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And I think, there might be the stereotype that men don't care, or that uh, they were all abuse over, they all forced it. And, God did make man to provide and protect. That's built into us.
Mhm.
And so when there's an abortion, I believe, and I've heard from many men that are in abortion healing groups, that that failure to protect their child is a huge emotional and spiritual wound, and on their identity. Goes against their God-given identity. And I think men can be in a like feel the dilemma. So there are those men that would be abusive and say, I will abandon you. There are men that will, many men who will say, I will support whatever you decide. You're the one that's going to carry the baby. I understand this is going to be a big impact or a big decision on your life, to their girlfriend or wife. And so they believe and are trying to support her by saying, this is your decision. I'll support whatever you decide. And I hear that heart. But what happens on the other end, and I hear this so many times, is that the woman was waiting for him to step up, and that what they needed was a man to say, we will do this. We will figure this out. I will not abandon you. And so the man is trying to be supportive, but it almost backfires. And then there are men have who have said that they will support, they will protect, let's do this. But the woman says, no, I'm not having this baby for whatever her reasons, reacting to whatever her pressures are, and has the abortion against his will, against his choice. And she's legally allowed to do that. And I have been with men weeping for the child that they lost, and desperately wanted that child, would have even taken the child into his own family, but he wasn't allowed to do that. So there is plenty of heartbreak in an abortion, and much of it is, as you've identified, is just unknown. We're just not aware of it.
And do you ever work with the grandparents? Because I think that's
Mm,
another overlooked demographic in this whole thing, are the grandparents who would have been supportive and maybe found out too late, and she already went. And especially if it's a younger one, and they, at least in my state, they don't ever need to know. Um, be informed is what I'm saying. The parents of the
yeah,
girl do not
right.
need to be informed. And then when they do find out, the grief that
Yeah.
goes with that, the anger that can go with that. I said, we
Mhm.
would have come around you and we would have supported you. I wish you would have told us. We are family. We're in this together.
Yes.
Um, those conversations, and then the trauma recovery after that.
Yes, well, we've absolutely had grandparents, and we encourage grandparents, aunts and uncles, brothers who would be siblings, anyone who's feeling impacted by someone's abortion. We encourage you to come forward, and there is help. For grandparents, in fact, I did a video on the latest Grandparents' Day on this, and all those incidents, all those situations that you described are in play. And uh, so there's the guilt that grandparents may feel because they were the ones that talked their daughter out of having the baby. Um, there are grandparents who are feeling guilty, like, what was it about me that she didn't feel she could come to me, or my son didn't feel he could come to me. So there's that dynamic of their own relationship with their daughter or their son, but then the loss of their grandchild, however they were involved or not involved, because at some point they might realize that this was human life that was lost. And I would say I've also had friends of the woman or the man that have been involved in an abortion, because they were the ones that talked the girl into it, in terms of, oh, well, you can't, you've got your big career ahead of you. How could you just met this guy. You don't want to be tied to him for life. And they think they're doing that out of friendship, and trying to look out for their friend. They may have provided transportation to the clinic, money for the abortions. And so I've talked with friends who are carrying their own guilt and remorse for their involvement in abortion. It's very, very widespread.
Yes, absolutely. Now, in your story, you talk about finding hope and finding freedom. Can you tell us more about that, as you
Mhm.
went through that whole grief, trauma, panic, worthlessness, and then you found a place of healing and hope?
Yeah. I believe that, Debbie, we heal in layers, and we heal over time.
Mhm.
And for me, reaching out to the Rachel's Vineyard, it's rachelsvineyard.org, and going to one of their programs was the beginning. I was 45 at that time. Women come with all ages, from just recently having an abortion, having one in a clinic, having taken the pills, um, and to 70s, 80s, I think we've had someone well into their 80s come forward for healing. But that was the beginning where all this bottled up anxiety and stress and regret and, you name it. My book covers 19 different emotions, all those emotions where you can finally start letting that out in a place that is safe and not judging you. And where your story is heard with compassion and not a political judgment or any other kind of judgment than I believe, the compassion of Christ. And when you're able to step back and kind of look at what you've done and what has happened since then, what's been done to you, what made you vulnerable to an unplanned pregnancy to begin with, or to choosing abortion. And you start kind of pulling that apart. It's the beginning of healing. And for some of us, that might be where we stay. It could be for many years. And then as time goes on, what we tend to see as women get a little bit older and maybe they're raising children of their own, and they're beginning to understand more the full implications, the full impacts of losing their child. We have other layers of healing. So, in my case, I was healing the identity that I thought I was a good girl. Maybe I'm not such a good girl. So that was a layer of healing. Healing the relationship with my mom took many, many years of the resentment that I felt that I couldn't talk to her. The shame and guilt were layers. And so whether they attend one program or there's my book, there's many wonderful books and programs on abortion healing. We look at it and maybe we see a different facet. And Jesus brings us, no, I want you to look here. And what about, Jane, you were a practicing Catholic. You believed in Jesus. Why did you leave me out of this? I don't remember praying about it. I don't remember asking him. I just took charge. And in my healing, Debbie, it was in that Rachel's Vineyard program where I, for the first time at 45 years old, really grasped the purpose of the cross, that Jesus died for me right now, right here, my circumstances. And it wasn't for people back then or other people who had committed under other sins. It was for me today and every day. And making that personal was overwhelming grief, but also overwhelming hope that there really is a savior. There really is someone who loved me that much. And so that was the beginning of me pursuing a relationship with Jesus and wanting to know him more. I started reading the Bible, started listening to more Christian music, and just really wanting to know this person who had done something for me. And not just that, but who has a plan for my life that didn't end when I had the first abortion or the second or the third or what turned out to be a divorce later on. That God has a plan for us that is so much bigger. And when I was able to understand that, and his scriptures about, he's come for our welfare to give us a future and a hope, it was like, oh my gosh, that he means that for me. Mm-hmm. And that opened up everything. And my life is just so much deeper and better and richer and fuller. And I still carry a heartbreak for the things that I've lost. They're both there, but I am not ruled by the heartbreaks. I'm guided by the hope that Jesus has for me.
And that's a really important piece. I think that, there was an inalterable loss. Mm-hmm. So it's kind of like if we have people with the relationships and we lose them and we never really forget them, but we're not guided by that. We don't stay stuck there. And I think that's an important point to make and to pull out for somebody who might be struggling with their post-abortive recovery and trauma, is that it's okay to grieve that. Just
Yes,
don't let that rule your life, for sure. Let
that's
the
right.
grace
That's
rule
right.
your hope.
And
Absolutely.
grief, grieving is an important part of the healing process. And
Yes,
because it's hidden or it's left with just a few people, our grief is unfinished. Our grief is aborted, and that's not healthy.
absolutely. And I think too, one of the things that you said was when you went to Rachel's Vineyard, that you were able to be fully vulnerable. And I think that's an
Mm.
important part of healing for anybody, is to be seen and to be known and to have that grace and compassion released in that place. Because so
Mm.
many times we want to hide, like Adam and Eve, they took the fig leaves and they hid, but that's not where healing happens. God is the God who sees,
Yes.
and He places other people, other Christians, other ministers in our lives to be that tangible piece, but
Hmm.
be seen, to be known, to have that compassion and grace released in that place, that revelation of forgiveness that can power you into the next,
Yes.
um, and empower you to forgive yourself too. I think sometimes we forget that
Absolutely.
we have to forgive ourselves.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think as well-meaning as we all are, and as Christians are, and when we're with someone and they talk about a trauma or a loss or something that has deeply wounded them, we feel that compassion, and we just like instinctively want to make it better. And so maybe we'll throw out a scripture, or we'll say, you can have more children if we're talking to someone younger. You can have more children. Well, what abortion healing groups that are well run, and like I said, there's many, many of them. The women and men that are there don't try to rush it. They're not uncomfortable with the grief. They recognize that it is a terrible grief, it is a terrible guilt, and that sometimes we need to sit in our conviction. Like for me, I believe that my abortions were sin and I did a terrible thing. And those abortions caused the death of my children. And for me, part of healing was to be able to say that and see that part of me, that woman, that girl who made those decisions for whatever reasons. And I would say it feel properly convicted. There is true and good guilt. However, then to not let that guilt overwhelm me or that shame overwhelm me. And so that's why I think healing in community, with people who understand you, whatever the loss might be, or whatever the sin pattern might be, is really so valuable. And then with women and men who have gone before you, who understand that this is part of the process. You need to be in that depth of despair, right? I cry out to you, but to hold the hope, and to be examples that God doesn't leave us there. He doesn't want us there.
Mhm. Right. Absolutely. Being guided by hope, grace, powered by forgiveness, and that revelation of forgiveness. Let me put your website up here. It's
Thank you.
mymentorjane.com. So if
Yes.
people go to your website, what can they find?
So they will find an overview of me. They'll find a link to my YouTube channel. They'll find a little testimony about me. I think where I would also direct them to go is to YouTube. And my YouTube, if you go on YouTube and search for My Mentor Jane, you'll find close to 300 videos, and more than 100 of them, and my most recent ones, are all different topics of healing after abortion for both men, women, grandparents, Mother's Day, Father's Day. And in those videos, and also on my website, you'll find links to the healing programs that I personally have experienced, that I know about, and that I would recommend no matter where you are in the process, whether you've just are recovering from taking abortion pills, or it might be many years since you've had an abortion in a clinic.
Awesome. So go check out our website, mymentorjane.com. If you've been touched by abortion or know somebody who's been touched by abortion, she has so many great resources out there. We don't need to stay stuck in past choices,
No.
past wounds, past griefs. We can have hope and healing and freedom in Jesus. So go make use of those, make them available to help people about them.
Thank you.
And don't forget to swipe, tap, or click over to deborahhenne.com. Follow me on social on the X, Instagram, or Facebook at Deborah Henne Author. And let's not forget to tune into our thoughts to make sure they sound like Jesus's, so they sound like freedom.